Well, welcome again to another edition of Frankly. Of course, I'm Chip Franklin, and that, of course, is Frank Figliuzzi, a former assistant director of the FBI and a current MSNBC contributor and an author with a really hot book right now called Long Haul. We'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. But Frank, obviously, you know, it's funny. We were just doing our pre-interview with our guest. He used the word ominous. I feel these are ominous times, and it's going to be nice to have somebody on to help us clarify some of the things that are confusing.
There's so much going on that it's easy to become really depressed about the state of legal affairs with regard to our former president and any hope of him being held accountable. He certainly was held accountable in a New York City courtroom, but what's going to go on with the federal trials, the Fulton County trial? Are we ever going to see him held to account in those issues? What's going on with the Supreme Court? No better person to talk about legal updates than a guy who literally was there, boots on the ground, when Steve Bannon was told, hey, you got to get yourself to prison by July 1st. And that guest today is Glenn Kirschner from MSNBC and NBC News. Hey, Glenn.
Hey, gentlemen, good to be with you.
It's got to be. I mean, a lot of this is established law that we're talking about, but what's gone upside down is the judge's interpretations, and I think, and a lot of people feel a denial of justice is what's happening right now. What is the current state of these charges against Trump? We're going to get to Bannon and some others, but first, the charges against Trump in Georgia, and of course, the document case and the January 6th case.
Yeah, so everything is on hold in Georgia, and it seems that there's no chance that we'll see a trial prior to November, certainly not for Trump and the others who are now involved in appellate litigation contesting Judge McAfee's ruling that DA Willis is not disqualified from prosecuting Trump and company. It's an open question as to whether the other defendants who didn't join that litigation could perhaps have their RICO trial set prior to November, but I am not holding out much hope for any trial in Georgia before the election. And things go from bad in Georgia to worse in Florida, courtesy of Judge Cannon. And gentlemen, I always have to start with this. The federal law, for anybody scoring at home, 28 United States Code 455, governs when a justice, that's a Supreme Court justice, a federal court judge, or a federal court magistrate judge, which is a lower level federal court judge, must disqualify themselves from presiding over a case. Here is the exact language. If the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, the judge shall disqualify themselves. I maintain that Judge Cannon has shown that her impartiality might reasonably be questioned 100 times over, maybe a little hyperbole, 98 times over. And unfortunately, she will neither abide by the federal law and recuse herself, nor has special counsel Jack Smith seen fit to file a motion to recuse that will then bubble up to the 11th Circuit and be resolved definitively. I think without that litigation and without a definitive ruling from the 11th Circuit, the American people are unlikely to have confidence in the results of the outcome of any trial in Florida in the event the case ever gets to trial, which it doesn't seem like it will. This is the thing that drives me to distraction. A few months ago, Judge Cannon asked the parties, the prosecutors and the defense, to propose trial dates. Jack Smith proposed July 8th, but more importantly, Donald Trump's defense attorneys proposed August 12th, indicating that is when they can go to trial. Judge Cannon said, no, I'm not setting any trial date. Instead, I'm going to keep these motions on a leisurely track, and maybe I'll resolve them in the coming months, or maybe I won't. And of course, she hasn't. And now, if that wasn't disheartening enough, she's invited disinterested parties, people who have no part of the litigation, to come on into her trial court and present arguments on whether Jack Smith has any right to be special counsel under the law. This is judicial insanity, and it is going unchecked thus far.
Why is
Glenn,
Why
Yeah,
is it unchecked?
go ahead, Chip. We've got endless questions. Go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just for the obvious next question is, how would you check her powers? I mean, and that procedure, I mean, that's what I don't understand. There was a football player once I saw get into Canton. He was an offensive guard, and he said, "My job was to move people against their will. We have the will, but we don't have the means. It seems."
Yeah, you're singing my tune. I was a center on the football team, and so I was banging heads for 60 minutes with a nose guard, and I was never happier in my life. And yes, you have to move people against their will. That's a great saying. And the way to do that is by filing a motion to recuse. And then you litigate in the full light of day everything that you believe makes clear that her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. That's a low bar. Might, not that she absolutely is proven to be unfair, simply that her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And there is at a minimum an appearance problem. And I think there's beyond an appearance problem. I don't know whether it is a combination of incompetence and compromise. I don't know if it's entirely one or entirely the other. But this can't go unchecked, because if it does, and think about this, gentlemen, if we look back in our rearview mirror and see that she has orchestrated a dismissal of the charges during trial with prejudice, which would not be susceptible to an appeal, and it looked like she was signaling that in some of her earlier orders, can you imagine how upset we are going to be that Jack Smith never litigated the motion to recuse and got an answer from the 11th Circuit?
So, Glenn, it sounds like Smith could argue a totality of the circumstance, the argument to have her recused, and boy, that would be many pages. But do you think he'll do it finally if we get to what's the next step on this? His filing to silence Trump with regard to saying things that are going to get FBI agents killed. She set a discussion for this, a hearing. Do you think if it's ultimately denied, that will be the trigger that moves him to?
Yeah, Frank, that's a great question.
So
Jack Smith has arguably set up his ability to appeal, albeit on a fairly narrow issue. He asked the judge to order Donald Trump's conditions of release to be modified to include a modest gag order, as you say, to keep Donald Trump from inciting violence against FBI agents. And I want to circle back to that in a minute. And in the event she refuses to modify his conditions of release, that can be appealed. So that is a narrow sliver of appeal, but maybe it gives Jack Smith a crack of daylight, and maybe he then feels comfortable putting other things in a more fulsome motion to recuse. But here's why I was so furious when I read the court pleadings and learned two things. One, that the FBI coordinated with Donald Trump's attorneys in advance of the execution of the search warrant, which, Frank, we almost never do. By we, you were a career FBI agent. I was a career federal prosecutor. The last thing we're going to do is tip off the target of the search warrant. Hey, guys, we're coming next Tuesday in the event you want to destroy some evidence. But they did that. And I'm not criticizing the FBI. I mean, these are unusual, unprecedented circumstances. So they went over and above. And here is the worst part. They made sure they would execute the search warrant at a time that neither Donald Trump nor his family members were even in the state of Florida. And knowing that, what did Donald Trump post? The FBI came locked and loaded, ready to assassinate me and hurt my family members. Talk about a bold-faced lie designed to inspire violence against the FBI. And what does Judge Cannon do? What she always does with the motion to modify conditions. I'll get around to it at my leisure, which basically forestalls Jack Smith's opportunity to even appeal it, because she's taking her sweet old time ruling on it.
Let's go back for a minute to Fulton County and this whole appellate process on Fani Willis. Is there legitimacy to this? We've already had a ruling that, yes, you have to remove your top prosecutor. Yes, there is the appearance of impropriety with this relationship. And Matt, now what is the argument? Why would she be removed?
Legitimacy, I think, is in the eye of the beholder, and I don't believe there is a meritorious appeal of Judge McAfee's ruling, which I think went farther than it needed to go. Once he concluded there was no conflict, there was no prejudice to any rights of any defendant, I don't believe, no. In fact, I'm pretty certain, based on my review of Georgia law, he didn't have to give the DA the ultimatum. Either you, Fani Willis, remove yourself, or Nathan Wade, one of your special counsel that you hired, must remove himself. I understand why he did it, to kind of mitigate the damage in the perception of the public because there might be an appearance problem. I don't think he had to do it. I'm not angry with him for doing it. I think he has presided over the cases well and honorably. But I don't think there's a viable issue on appeal, but it doesn't matter because the appellate court said, we're going to take it up. We're not going to take it up till October. We have until March to resolve it. I mean, again, this is insanity. We are slouching toward, if not the end of our republic, we're slouching toward giving Donald Trump an opportunity to retake the reins of federal power and become the dictator on day one he told us he will become.
Yeah.
You know, when there's a leak in your house, water, you go to the main turnoff, right? And you know that's going to stop everything. If you can't find it, that's the way to do it. In my mind now, every case as it litigates, in my head goes to two things: an upside down flag and a spouse that was there on January 6th. And I wonder now if, in fact, this has permeated the entire MAGA part of the Republican Party, is knowing that, hey, they sent a clear signal to us. You know, when they took that immunity case after the appellate court had totally dismantled it, when they took that case and now they're stalling it, to me, it was a clear sign that I don't know where Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett are, but we definitely know where Alito and Thomas are. In some ways, you know, we're rearranging the chairs on the deck when there's a hole in the bottom. I mean, how do we go forward and pretend everything's normal, knowing this?
The Supreme Court is not normal. We're not operating the way we would expect a fair, independent, impartial high court to behave. So, there have to be long-term remedies like increasing the number of justices, which only makes sense for the population and the increased caseloads, quite frankly. But that is a long-term potential fix. In the short term, I don't know what can be done because the court has been captured. And, notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution itself says a president shall take care to faithfully execute the laws of the country. To me, that sounds inconsistent with a president who violates the laws of the country that he is charged with faithfully executing. Not to mention this whole presidential absolute immunity nonsense. The Constitution says even if somebody is impeached in the House and convicted in the Senate, he can be prosecuted for the exact same conduct. That suggests to me that a president can be prosecuted. So I have no confidence that the Supreme Court will get this right. Lord knows they've delayed until they're running out the clock on a possible November trial. Of course, after he was adjudicated an insurrectionist in Colorado by both the trial court judge and the Supreme Court of Colorado, and the Constitution expressly says that if you took an oath to support the Constitution and thereafter engaged in or gave aid and comfort to an insurrection, you are disqualified, and only Congress can remove the disqualification by a 2/3 vote. Notwithstanding the express clear language of the Constitution, the Supreme Court couldn't hustle quickly enough to make sure they ignored the Constitution and kept him on the primary ballot in Colorado and virtually in every other state at this point. Here's what I believe the Supreme Court is going to do. They're going to, again, ignore the Constitution. They're going to create the possibility of some limited presidential immunity for crimes, not just for civil suits. They're going to remand or send the case back to Judge Tanya Chutkan, who I know well. I used to try murder cases against Tanya Chutkan back when she was a public defender and I was a homicide prosecutor in D.C. I have the utmost regard for Judge Chutkan. And they will instruct her to hold endless hearings on whether some of Donald Trump's conduct might sort of dwell on the outer perimeter of his presidential duties, a little light treason around the edges, so to speak. And then after all of those evidentiary hearings are held and findings have been entered by Judge Chutkan, they will direct that she return the case to them for further proceedings in the Supreme Court. So goodness knows when we might see a federal trial of Donald Trump for trying to overturn the results of a presidential election.
So a question here, this is all doom and gloom, and rightly so, but if there's any semblance of a bright spot, is it possible when they send this back to Chutkan that she, in her hearings that she's going to hold, that essentially we then, the American people, really get a fulsome look at all the evidence of criminal conduct against Trump, and we get that before the election? Is that possible?
That is possible, Frank, and I love you searching for that little shred of silver lining behind the big, dark orange cloud, because that's what I do all day, every day. I hunt for the silver lining. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't, and I love your take on it. So the answer is yes. Unfortunately, if those hearings are held, the information will be filtered through bloggers and reporters. Not that that's a criticism of bloggers and reporters, but we kind of had to rely on what was coming out of the courtroom in New York in the Trump prosecution. And I think it was reliable, but it's very different when you get to see and hear it for yourself, as compared to the hearings down in Georgia, which are televised, and they just kind of hit you viscerally, like in the gut. You can see what's going on. So yes, we will potentially get the benefit of those motions hearings if the case is remanded to Judge Chutkan. And listen, I embrace any information that we can get out there and try to penetrate the bubbles that need to be penetrated with the truth, rather than the lies, propaganda, and disinformation that is forever spewing from Donald Trump's mouth.
It seems to me that if there's a magic number in all of this, it's 67, because in the House and the Senate, obviously they're the only ones that can, especially after this is the argument that Trump's lawyer made before Sotomayor, that the impeachment process is paramount here, right? And so that's how you have to deal with this. And I just wonder, I mean, I don't know where the line is for the Supreme Court and how far they would allow Trump to go moving forward, as far as arresting people, this mass deportations, using military in the streets, violating posse comitatus, all these things, right? But the thing I wonder is that the Democrats realize just they have to get to 67 somehow if Trump gets reelected, in order to remove him. And I wonder even then if the Supreme Court would stay out of it.
Yeah, right. No, I don't think they would. It's interesting, Chip, because I had some confidence in the Supreme Court back during the election challenge cases, because had they wanted to interfere, in their determination to keep an aspiring dictator in power, they had every opportunity to do it then, and they declined. So I thought, maybe the court will hold. But now they seem to have gone a whole nother way. And I am less and less confident that they are honest brokers, that enough justices are honest brokers of the law and the Constitution to, keep Donald Trump in his place where he belongs, which is in courtroom after courtroom after courtroom, being held accountable. And what I said, and I was not at all surprised by the New York verdicts, what I have said all along is the minute these cases move from the court of public opinion, where there are no rules of evidence, rules of procedure, or rules of law, and Donald Trump and his flunkies and loyalists and lackeys can spout all of the lies they want all day long in their attempt to continue to deceive the gullible. Once it moves into a court of law, Donald Trump is done. He's done in every single criminal prosecution, because the evidence of his guilt is overwhelming, incontrovertible. But now the stumbling block is we can't get another dang case into court.
Yeah, I keep hammering this issue, Glenn, whenever I have the chance, which is a jury of 12 American citizens heard the evidence and unanimously said, oh, absolutely. Yeah, the evidence is there. He did it. And that's being swept under the rug in so many ways. You mentioned New York. And boy, by the way, I don't know, Chip, if you've seen this, but Glenn has a following of dedicated democracy fighters on his Justice Matters team, and you'll see the signs out in the crowd and on the street outside these courthouses. Justice Matters.
Oh, right.
Somebody's over there. And that, I know that, yep, Glenn's people are on the job, and I think it's fantastic. But talk to us about the next step in that New York conviction. Where is this going? Sentencing is scheduled. Do you see a pathway that allows Judge Merchan to include a prison sentence in his sentence?
I see a pathway to prison, absolutely, Frank. And here's why. I think Judge Merchan, who is a serious, experienced jurist who really did an extraordinary job presiding over the Trump case, I think he will appreciate that if there's no punishment for somebody who committed 34 felony offenses in violation of New York state law to try to gain unfair advantage in a presidential election, if there is no punishment for that, then you are basically encouraging others who would choose to follow in Donald Trump's footsteps to do it all over again, maybe even double down, maybe even take it to the next step. And the only punishment is incarceration. And I was the only thing I can say I was disappointed with Judge Merchan about is when he found beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump committed 10 offenses of contempt of court for violating the gag order. And there was an available punishment of 30 days in jail for each count. He said, I don't want to put you in jail because you're a former president and you could very well be a future president. That, unfortunately, was Judge Merchan announcing that we have two standards under the law, one for the powerful and the privileged and one for everybody else. I think he might even regret that. It may have tumbled out of his mouth in the moment, and he may have felt that way, and I understand why. But if you don't punish this behavior, and when I say punish, probation is no punishment. If he gets probation, then this entire endeavor that we all just lived through, this painful run up to the trial and the trial itself, it will all be for naught. And let me tell you what's worse than probation: home detention. Why do I say it's worse than probation? Because that will be sentencing Donald Trump to binge watch Netflix and order DoorDash. And that is actually a vacation for Donald Trump. He won't be out and about holding his hate rallies and trying desperately to win re-election. He'll be cooling his heels at home with no responsibilities. So I think we need to see a prison term. I think we're going to get a prison term adjudged. But then the question is, does Judge Merchan suspend it pending appeal, or does he order it immediately executed? If he orders it immediately executed, orders him to report or be taken to prison, then Donald Trump will rush to the appeals court seeking an emergency stay and try to convince the appeals court to put a hold on it. Sometimes I think we have too many appellate rights in this country. I embrace our rights. I really do. If we could do it in a timely manner, that would be wonderful. But no, I think we're going to see a prison term. I would like to think we're going to see it executed. That is, we're going to see Donald Trump actually have to report to prison. But I don't think I would lay my $1 bet. That's my betting limit. I don't think I would lay my $1 bet on it.
Yeah. And I mean, if I can put some levity into this, I'm hearing that Melania will file an amicus brief to say, dear God, don't have him on home confinement with me. And so I don't know what that's going to look like. But, last thing, because we know you have to go. You're a busy man these days. The Supreme Court, we've learned just in the past few hours, really, that Clarence Thomas has reported, this is what he's reported, $4 million in gifts during his time as a justice. How can we possibly have people not recusing themselves, receiving $4 million in gifts? Samuel Alito blaming his wife, and by the way, appears to be lying to Congress when he says, he talks about the timing of the upside down flags, which the neighbor contradicts. How do we, is there any hope in the short term of having them recuse themselves or even getting them in front of Congress?
No hope in the short term, but I mean, I think this is why we have impeachment inquiries, which is also a challenge given that the Republicans at the moment still have control of the House. These things have to be investigated in the setting of impeachment inquiries if we care about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Because as of right now, I don't think people will have confidence in anything the Supreme Court decides, particularly when it comes to January 6th related crimes.
Got it. Glenn, I know you've got to run. We're thrilled that you've been with us, and keep up all the great stuff you're doing in the name of justice.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
All right. Well, there was a little bit of reality. The Trump people came in and threw me right off the broadcast. No, I want to thank Glenn Kirschner again for his time. And Frank, obviously, I can't help but go dark on this, because I really do worry about, I read a lot about Alito and Roberts, and Alito went far to the right after the Affordable Care Act, when Roberts became part of the 6-3 vote.
Yeah.
And it's created a chasm between the two, and it split the court. And I wonder, I'm really curious as to Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Barrett, and I wonder if Roberts is doing some backroom, or has he just given in? Has he given up? Obviously, he was part of not allowing Alito to have some sort of effort to recuse him from any of these future January 6th court cases. Even if Trump is defeated, you got to wonder if there is going to be, and in the fall, you got to wonder if there's going to be a trial with the Supreme Court and their views on him. And I don't know. I don't even know if they have a broader view that something needs to be corrected on a bigger scale outside the constitutional assigned methods. But I mean, all of that stuff is. I wonder how far will they go.
I've got to tell you, I have really come a long way, sadly, on my opinions of the Supreme Court. I held out as long as I could to respect the sanctity of the court and the fact that they shouldn't have to necessarily answer to anyone, because we'd get dangerously into second guessing all of their decisions. But I'm now at a place where they've lost credibility. And, for people watching us who are saying, look at the tears. Oh, look at people upset that now someone they disagree with is controlling the court. You've got that wrong. This is not about conservatism versus liberals. I go back to Antonin Scalia as a justice, and people might have vehemently disagreed with his positions, but he was an objective applier of precedent and facts. He had his own beliefs about, the Constitution and strict interpretation of it. But what we have now is not about that. It's about imposing a personal agenda onto the court and its rulings, even when it defies all logic and the Constitution. And what's the agenda that we think we see here, or I see? I have to tell you, this involves Christian nationalism. It involves a theological perspective that does not belong on the court, whether it's Opus Dei Catholicism, whether it's the cult that Amy Coney Barrett came from, that had to approve her marriage. We've got a court with a personal agenda that involves Christian nationalism and other things. They think the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and they think they're the only ones that can fix it and must fix it. And there's great danger in that.
I just wonder what China and Russia and some of our other adversaries think. They got to be thinking, well, maybe we should just step back and see if they do this to themselves. I mean, it's quite possible that we could get in. I mean, if I used to say to myself, I used to say that if Trump loses, well, then, then we got it solved. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that there's not going to be this has lit something that is hard to extinguish. And I don't know. I'm not even sure I can articulate what it is. but it's not an adherence. It's not a strict constructionist viewpoint of the framers' intent. No, it's something outside that, and um, it feels like it's out of control. I mean, I remember when
Control. So I'm considering things I never would consider before, which is do we expand the court? Do we think about term limits that straddle administration so that it's not a completely political assignment? Something's got to get done. But we, as Glenn pointed out, we don't have the environment that's receptive.
Right, exactly.
That, and we won't. With regard to where we're going, yes, this is bigger than Trump. This is bigger. This is a movement that is willing to discard democracy in favor of an authoritarian government. And we may have a semi-permanent or permanent insurgency that's developed in the United States that could take a generation or more to resolve itself.
And we don't know what direction.
No, we really don't. It's really troubling because the last bastion really for a democracy is that rule of law. And we've lost it. And at best, we've lost the perception of credibility. At worst, there is no credibility left.
I remember I was in D.C. doing talk radio when McVeigh blew up the was it the Murrah?
Alfred Murrah
building. And I remember, just trying to wrap my head around domestic terrorism, because I mean, other than I don't know, Patty Hearst, we didn't really have anything like that, right? I mean, there was an attack in the early 90s on the World Trade Center, but it wasn't really successful. I mean, that was my first inkling that there was some unrest, and that was only 25 years, about 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that and you say, what are we capable of? Let's go back to Steve Bannon, who is going to spend 4 months in jail starting in July, and look at the things he's said. I told you this. I was doing research yesterday for a video I made. He wanted Fauci and Christopher Wray to be beheaded and their heads put on spikes outside the White House. I mean, when people can say that sort of thing, he got kicked off Twitter. Okay, fine. But I mean, and he still was accepted. And I forget the guy's name, Priebus.
Jack Probosia or
Probosia. I found a video of him with Bannon there and talking about how January 6th, they didn't really win that day, but we'll have another January 6th. And I still have on tape of Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell calling an insurrection and saying that the president was responsible at the time, President Trump at the time. And what flipped them? What caused so many people in the Republican Party and in Fox television to flip their view of that day when everybody saw what we saw?
It's the feeling, or for many, it's the feeling that they are part of a movement that is bigger than they are, that the end justifies the means. That
theocratic in a way, right?
Yeah, very much so. That, if you listen to Bill Barr talk, if you listen to speeches given by Alito at the Federalist Society and other places, people should check out a speech that was given by John Durham. Do you remember John Durham, the independent, the special, what the hell was he, special counsel, empowered by Barr to look into the Russia investigation that was opened by the FBI, Crossfire Hurricane, that, by the way, the DOJ IG said was properly predicated, right? And Barr didn't accept that. So he appoints John Durham. John Durham goes on this mission. There's an old speech of John Durham that he gives to, I believe it was Yale, but it was on the topic of it being a Christian prosecutor.
Wow.
He goes on to point out that he does believe he's on a mission from God. I'm paraphrasing. And that, he's the messenger. He's the messenger on the mission to save society. And that's what we're talking about here. And those people are zealots. You can't argue with them. Hey, this looks unconstitutional. Hey, this isn't with precedent. They don't care because they're saving the world.
Well, and I try to tell people this, that, if you look in the world of Islam, and people say, who is the number one killer of Muslims? It's Muslims. And it's all different sects of religion. that would develop here as well. I mean, it wasn't just a Reformation in Europe, but if you want to go down that line of theocracy, you're going to have battles. But there's going to be. I mean, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and before Vatican II, before Roe v. Wade, and the environment was amazing as a kid growing up. It was a wonderful thing to grow up in, and there were rules, but it was dealt with in a way, and nuance was employed. Nuance is dead. Irony is on life support. These are people that have my way or will hurt you. I mean, to be frank, and you're hearing that now. And
irony, Chip, the irony about the "will hurt you" part with Bannon's recent statement that you've pointed out, that he wants Jack Smith's head on a stick, and Chris Wray, right? Was that the second?
It was Chris Wray and Fauci.
And Fauci. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me point something out. Some poor mentally disturbed individual is going to try to act out on that trigger. And let's look at history at what happens when that happens. We've got a guy who tried to breach the Cincinnati FBI field office and ended up dead in a cornfield, shot by the police. We've got a guy in Provo, Utah, who FBI threatening to kill Biden. He swings a weapon at the agents, and they have to shoot him. He's dead. Ashley Babbitt becomes part of a violent mob inside the Capitol. She's dead. So be careful about who you're calling for heads on a stick, because those people that you've mentioned have a security detail on them. So, who is it that's going to get hurt doing this? The martyrs for the cause.
Well, and I think one of the things that, that General Milley said, he said a lot of things that were concerning, but also encouraging at this point, is that the military, and especially the generals and the admirals, are all behind the Constitution. They grew up. Many of them are just slightly younger than me, maybe late 50s, somewhere in there, and they respect Milley and they respect that. But I wonder about the next generation. There were a lot of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys that were former military, although I will say not quite as many as advertised, I think. And again, military takes anybody, pretty much. So the idea that the military has some sort of disease in it, no, it all comes back to what Glenn and you are always talking about, is the Constitution, and adhering to the principles that we've all agreed over 2.5 centuries will work. And of course, there's a construct in the Constitution to change it when events happen. But that all seems moot to these people. Like you said, they're looking for that benevolent dictator in their mind, somebody that can move them through these difficult times. And many of them believe Trump is that guy, which is the most misguided thing in the world, because he's literally a sociopath. And,
you mentioned generals. Look, the next Secretary of Defense in a Trump administration could very well be Michael Flynn.
Jesus.
A convicted felon who has on video taken the QAnon pledge. On video. You can go look it up. He's a lunatic. And I would predict he's the next Secretary of Defense under Trump.
Well, I mean, you start to look at, obviously, the problems with that. I remember when Sally Yates went to Justice and said, "Hey, this guy's bad news. He's working for Turkey. He can't, be a national security director. I mean, this is just not a role." And of course, then they jettisoned her, and it was only Flint being indicted and tried and found guilty and sentenced and then pardoned that we find him where he is today. I worry about the people that you used to work with in the FBI and the intelligence community, and what Trump would do to them. I think he would cut the bureaucracy in Washington. I mean, again, I tell people, go read The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. They explained it back in 2016, the danger when you have a country the size of ours that does not have enough people in the key positions to make sure things work. I'm not talking about directors. I'm talking about mid-level bureaucrats who make it all happen. And the bureaucrats is now all of a sudden some sort of a pejorative, but it's not. These are hardworking people that really care, work for crap money. And yeah, they have government pensions, some of them, but they nonetheless, to rise in government service, you have to do a good job. You have to really care. Yeah. And especially, I think, in those moments where there is some political aspects to it. But, I mean, if he's allowed to ascend, I don't think we're making enough noise. I don't think we're telling people so they can fully understand what will happen in the first 2 weeks of January, or the last 2 weeks of January 2025, moving into that year. I don't think he knows, and I think he feels emboldened by the Supreme Court. I really do think there's going to be few governors there to stop him.
You know, Atlantic Magazine a few months back did an entire edition called something like "If Trump Wins," and the whole magazine was devoted to what happens. The plan, you talked about the FBI. Everybody assumes, yes, of course, a new president comes in, he's going to have new cabinet secretaries. He'll certainly think about appointing a new director, because, by the way, the director has a 10-year term. I'm sure Trump will not honor that, as he did not honor Jim Comey's 10-year term. So yes, of course, but that's not what concerns me, because as you said, if you've got the rank and file careerists all the way up to deputy director, by the way, which is a career FBI agent, then you've got something that might hold, right? And might counter the guy who's gone off the reservation. Sorry to use a term that's now politically incorrect. But what the plan is to do away with civil service protections in these agencies, which does away with the career people that are up to deputy director. So imagine a scenario where the deputy director takes a loyalty pledge also to Trump, where the head of every one of the 56 field offices in the FBI takes a pledge to Trump and is handpicked by the Trump administration. Now throw in the U.S. attorneys in all of the regions of the country who prosecute the FBI's cases, and now you've got a crisis on your hands. No more public corruption cases against Republicans. Oh no. National security case against Russia? Probably not, right? And so we've got a problem.
And you know, when you start going down that path, it's really even hard to estimate what would happen. I mean, you know, like as you mentioned before, if in fact we lose a big chunk of, I mean, look, when NASA has a problem with somebody in space, they don't go to the head of NASA. They go to the like in Hidden Figures, they go to the people that have put it up there. Everybody saw Apollo 13 and saw it was astronauts and it's low-level people that worked together to get that vehicle back. That's the United States right now. And if we don't have the people in place that know how to do these things, and we've moved them out because they're part of the deep state, I don't think you can calculate the what could possibly happen to us. But I do know that our adversaries would love every second of it. I don't know. Do you? I mean, I don't know what the tipping point was. It 2016 had to be close to it, but I mean, there were a lot of people obviously in place before that, ready for something like this to happen. Maybe not consciously, but when they did, they saw an opportunity. You know, it's like a criminal walking past an unlocked door. You know, and I think about, you know, you and your friends and the people you've met over the years, and their concern and how at the level it must be. I mean, there's people that obviously that are not you so much, but me that have access to information right now that's got to scare the hell out of them. I mean, do you have any doubt that if it's a contentious election and somehow Trump gets out, that he won't go after the Biden family?
I know that they will not accept the results of the election.
Yeah, they already said that.
So from a security perspective, all hell could break loose, number one. Number two, believe them when they say that they will go after. There's a whole plan now to go after Democrats and quote the entire Biden family. Some have even called, like Laura Loomer, for the death penalty for Biden and some of these people. Marco Rubio has said, count me in on the revenge plan. So there we are. He's jockeying for vice president, by the way. It's disgusting that someone who actually did a great job co-chairing the Senate Intelligence Committee, right, has gone off the deep end. Yeah. So yeah, it's ugliness up ahead, and it's up to us. No one's going to save us but ourselves. It's up to us.
I hope the Democrats have learned the lesson of these swing states after 16, and I think they have, and we saw it in 2020. I do worry about states like Ohio, and or not so much Ohio. Ohio is probably going to go red, but let's say Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan, say they go blue and they decide to appoint new electors. I mean, Roberts, and I know Roberts has been a strong states' rights in voting. Like I know that in the Supreme Court, they look at it like you got to leave the states up. This is up to the states. But we all know, in other words, after you lose to appoint new people to say you won, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And Democrats, and we talk about Bannon and some of these others that say these violent things. There's some pretty heavy rhetoric going on on the left as well. And what would happen if, in fact, they told women you can't have contraception anymore, and how people would respond.
Yeah, we just had a vote in the Senate against contraception.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. What? And news of the week. But we just talked about it. Betting Trump loyalists key positions. Look what's happened. We just found out that Speaker of the House Johnson has appointed to the House Intelligence Committee, arguably the most important national security committee in Congress, Congressman Ronnie Jackson, who's been demoted post-retirement from admiral to captain because of his disgusting behavior and conduct as an officer and a doctor, handing out pills, running a 24/7 pharmacy, taking drugs while he's on duty himself. And then Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, who was part of the plan for overthrowing the valid election with false electors. The FBI had seized his cell phone and records, and he fought like hell not to give those over. This is a man in Perry that believes in the theory of the Italian satellites changing the voting machine outcomes in America. And now those two guys are going to have access to the most sensitive classified in the country.
It's funny because when you talk about, especially Jackson and his lies about Trump's health at one point, remember when he said he was 6'3", 215, right? I said, no, that's his thigh, dude. But anyway, but I wonder about Mike Johnson, and again I go back to this idea of theocracy, because he is very, very religious, and in a way that most of us don't understand. I mean, most of the people watching this are probably on the left of center, although not necessarily, because hopefully that we have this kind of reach to people, since this affects us all. There are a lot of people, and I'm sure you have a lot of friends too that voted Republican over the years, and I'm very close to a lot of them. And a lot of people I know that voted Trump first time and not in 2020, they're the most alarmed. Possibly they feel like they have a sense of guilt or something, but they shouldn't. I mean, I think that there was, the Democratic Party, with the Anthony Weiner stuff and all that on the build up to that, and in Hillary's, using that server, not that she did anything wrong, but the perception of it was bad. Everything about that summer, and you go back and look, with Podesta, calling the DNC and hitting that phishing thing and just losing all those emails, everything that possibly could have gone wrong happened. And I'm not sure the Democrats have really figured out, how to keep something from happening again. I mean, we hear people that are close to the campaign that tell me why isn't Biden out there more? Well, we're kind of protecting. No, you're not protecting him. Get him out there so people can understand he has a way of talking that's a little different, but he's still cognizant. I mean, you and I have talked about this before at length. The media needs to say, look, there's a clear difference between the cognitive decline of Donald Trump and the slight speech impediment that Biden has. Sure, yeah. Biden is older, but the mistakes he makes now are what people over 65 make, like where are my glasses stuff. I do that, I just think that, I really worry that we have this opportunity. One last thing, and I'll shut up. I really agree with Glenn that we have to put Trump in jail on July 11th.
Yeah. Let's close out on this, because I know we both have to run, but on this notion of getting into the weeds on who's older, who's aging more rapidly, who's got cognitive decline or not. Look, this is distraction for me. Right? I'm the national security guy. Guess what? Yes, we've got two old guys running. You know what? I'm voting for democracy and national security and against the existential threat to our country. That's it. We can talk till we're blue in the face about who's older and who's more decrepit. That's not it. Are you going to vote for democracy or are you not? Plain and simple, period.
Let's end it with one last little hopeful thing. I mentioned I have a neighbor who voted for Trump, and we're close in 2016, didn't in 2020. We talk a lot about it. I saw him yesterday. I was coming in. He was coming in from work, and he had your book in his hand. He goes, "I'm flying tomorrow, and I just picked up the book." And I said, "How did you get? I didn't even. So you can actually get the book in your hand now? People can."
Oh gosh, it's been out for a week. It's doing
Okay.
astoundingly
Great.
well, by the way. Right now, as we record this, it's the number 37 book in the entire country out of over 1 million books that they track.
Wow.
Yeah, we're number 3 on Amazon's mover and shaker list, which means the 3rd fastest rising book in the country. It's long haul. It's a true crime account of the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative. And absolutely, it's out in bookstores, Amazon, anywhere you get your books.
And your talent is something that all great writers have to have, is you care about the people that you talk about. And that's most important, because you can, otherwise you're just a documentarian. And that's what I really dig about it. So good stuff. Again, it's Law Hall, Frank Figliuzzi. See him on MSNBC and right here on Frankly. I'm Chip Franklin. Until next time, thank you.
Take care.